Was law something, was that you destined to be a lawyer?
No.
Was anybody in your family, was that law? Was there
No, my father was born in 1902 in Rowlett, PA. And his parents died when he was quite young. He had a brother, Durward, who ended up living in Casadega. They lived in South Dayton. And they got brought up by other families. I don't know if it was the flu in the early 1900s or what it was, but it was just, you know. But eventually, he apprenticed within the International Typographical Union and learned printing. And that became his trade. And at the time, when you completed your apprenticeship, if you got your journeyman's card, I mean, that was like gold. He could literally, you know, go to a town, sign in at the Union Hall, and find work the next day. And so he, you know, he I guess practiced trade in Miami, and my mother's sister ended up marrying a printer. My mother's family was from Oswego, and she went to normal school, and then, but her sister's husband was a printer, so my dad and my Uncle Eddie always got along wonderfully, because I think both of them had worked at one time for the Congressional Record for a while, and different places, and everything was wonderful until, of course, in this town, the PJ had been a union paper.
Okay.
And I think it came in maybe the late 40s, early, I don't remember the exact year, but there was a strike. And then the strike turned into a lockout, which of course are labor terms in terms of who's keeping who away, you know. And at the time, the union had enough money that they came in and started the morning paper here themselves. And that was the Sun, and then the Star, the Morning Star, and that lasted until a private family bought it, and at some point they decided it wasn't financially a good thing for him. So he ended up being a printer in Buffalo, Erie, and then finally Cleveland, for the Plain Dealer in Cleveland. And he would take the bus and stay down there during the week and then come home weekends. So, and my mother actually relocated here. She was born in '08. She came down here to work for the Girl Scouts as a professional for the Girl Scouts. And the people on the north side were big into Girl Scouts and scouting and things, and helped her find a place and made good friends, and but no. So the end of the story is, no, I was not destined to be a lawyer. Yeah, but I went to SUNY Oswego, first 4-year class of liberal arts graduates there. They had a couple years of transfers, but we were the first 4-year graduates. So I studied political science, took some philosophy, I did some things, and I was accepted. I had a PhD program offer from University of Kentucky, and I had a master's in government offer from William and Mary. And I decided to go for the 2-year. The people I were talking to said, listen, if you start a PhD program, you don't finish it, you don't have anything. But get your master's.
Yeah.
And it was a 2-year program. William and Mary offered me an assistantship. I drove down, I got a rented room, made arrangements, and then Vietnam heated up, and I couldn't get a 2-year deferment. I could get a 1-year deferment. And it turns out that somebody left a teaching job in Casadega. I was not an education major or nothing about it, but so somebody told me about it, and I knew I could get a deferment for a year and some time to figure it out. And I went up and taught school there in 1968-69 for for $6,800 a year. That was the pay. Very nice people, but I'm barely 3 years older than the seniors. You know, it's an interesting time. But and I had some cousins that went to school there, and William and Mary had agreed to give me time. But then it turned out that I ended up joining the reserves, the Army Reserve here, and I had taken a professional careers test and been invited to a summer program in Albany by the state of New York that they ran at a SUNY Albany for one of the summers during my college years. And you work for a company, and then every Sunday night they'd have a seminar and bring somebody in from the state government and talk to you about it, that kind of thing. So I called them up after I decided I didn't want to teach anymore. It was a good experience, but not my cup of tea. And they gave me a job in Buffalo, which was good because I needed work. And that was it. Then I took my reserve training with them, which the state was very good about letting you off and you accrued credits and all that kind of thing. Yeah. So by that time, and I had gotten to know Lynn Hartley and some other folks, and I started looking at the future, and you know, I love this area. And one of the things that I was looking for was something that would allow me to stay here and still, you know, make a living, support a family, whatever. So I took the law school admission test. I was in the latter part of my training in Fort Polk, Louisiana, and I got a weekend pass. And I went up to Northwestern Louisiana State College, then it's called Northwestern State now, I think, in Natchitoches. And took the exam, had a motel room instead of a barracks. I mean, it was like heaven, you know? And my mind was so clear, because I've been doing the Army training, not cluttered up at all. Yeah. And so I did okay, and I got accepted at Syracuse, and left the state of New York and went to Syracuse, and that was that.
You graduated what year?
73.
73.
It was an interesting year. Some nice folks. I mean, Sotir, I think, was in that group, and Rennie Perlee, Flowers. There might have been one or two more. And I remember at the time, the way I found out if you passed or not, there was a Buffalo legal paper. Yeah. And you called, and she said, "What's your name?" And you gave it to her, and she said, "Congratulations." And that's how you learned it. And then there were a few people that did go to the pub that afternoon, as I recall.
Yeah, I bet. Did you leave the pub?
Yes. Not enough did I leave it, but but no, it was good. It was nice. And I had known Joe Gerasi. His parents lived up the street from my folks, growing up a little bit, and had done some things for him when he was at town of Bastille, Politico, and in addition to being a lawyer. I remember the family owned a building on Chautauqua Avenue in Lakewood, which they still own, I think. And he had an office there, and at the time he was a pipe smoker. Mm. And so I got to know him a little bit. So it worked out that he and Lucian offered me summer clerkship for 2 years. Okay. So I worked for them on 214 West 5th Street, which is where they were. Mm-hmm. And Sonia Hillam and Jane, they became the county, went to the county with Joe there. They were two of the legal secretaries, and excellent. And yeah. I mean, it was an interesting contrast between Lucian and Joe in terms of just how they practiced and what they did and all those things. Yeah. So they split up actually when I was in law school, and they both offered me positions. But I was a Lakewood kid, so went to work for Joe. But it wasn't too long before county executive became a full-time job. Mm-hmm. And I was, a little reluctant to take it on by myself. Lynn was practicing, Hartley, and we were friends. So, we got together, and that went on for a while. I covered the office for a time when Lynn was given a International Rotary Fellowship, or whatever they call that, where people can go and spend several months as the guest of the local Rotary group there and experience life. So he went to the Philippines. I stayed in Jamestown.
And I think he was talking briefly about that, going there and finding the location where his dad had died.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So that, I mean, it was a wonderful thing for him, and it was a good learning experience for me.
Now you're in the fire. I mean, you're in it.
Mm-hmm.
What did you have? What did they kind of have you do? Was there a sort of a niche, or were you doing just sort of general practice stuff?
No, it was kind of whatever they wanted. I mean, I did. Wayne Tranmer worked for them.
Yes, Wayne, yes.
And he should be a legend if he isn't. I mean, he knew more about titles than.
Absolutely.
So I learned titles from him, which I don't know if it's a curse or a, because that's gotten kind of old hat. But there aren't too many guys that do titles anymore, really.
No, you're absolutely right.
But it was good to see it. Very studious, very good notes, paid attention. And then he would do all the deliveries also.
Mm-hmm.
And, but everybody treated me very well. I mean, the difference between law school and the practice is enormous.
Mm-hmm.
And if it isn't for the saving grace of the legal, we don't just call them secretaries, but it was a term of honor to be a legal secretary, in my opinion,
Right.
in those days or now.
Right.
But now that we call them something different, that's fine. But that's kind of what.
Well, I think every firm
Yeah.
had that one or two individuals.
Mm-hmm.
We had three of them
Mm-hmm.
here that were just so solid and had made their career out of it.
Yes,
And
Yep.
we're very proud of that.
and their grammar was good. Their phone skills were good. They could handle people. They could maintain the gate, but still keep it open a little bit, it was great to learn that.
Tell me a little bit about Wayne Tranmer. I certainly remember him extremely well. He was a paralegal before they had such a term.
Yes, and he looked at all the searches.
Yeah.
And if he had a question, he talked to Lucian or Joe, but for the most part, he looked at him and then he made what he needed to do. And
What was his background?
I don't know.
Yeah.
He might have been taught by them, or maybe Lucian. I don't know that. He was from Celeron, I think, originally. But just a very nice man.
Yeah, I have such a vision now that you mentioned his name.
Yeah.
So as each of those individuals, most of those individuals, with Joe and Lynn, ultimately they turned to politics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were politically inclined, but
Right.
ultimately got into the public sector. During those time periods, was that difficult running an office when half of it is sort of out the door looking, doing the political aspect of it?
Well, I mean, if you think about the Wellman building back in those days,
Yeah.
I think Spodos were in there. I think Lyle Heimball was in there. Bruce K. Carpenter was in there. Lynn and I were in there. I'm not sure who else all,
Was
but
Booty and Olson?
perhaps. I don't have a full list here,
Yeah.
But and the surrogate court was across the street
Mm-hmm.
in the hotel on the mezzanine.
Right.
What the part-time jobs did, I mean, I know. How long have you been village attorney now in Walker?
40-some years.
Yeah, I was immediately proud of you. If you remember, I left there. I went to the corporation council.
Right.
But all those part-time positions with a steady paycheck help cover the ups and downs of the practice in those days.
Right.
So,
That's right. When you resigned, they had an opening at Faulkner. Hadn't
Yeah.
thought about this either. And 4 or 5 people applied. And I had not been admitted in New York yet.
okay.
I had been in Pennsylvania because of the timing. I took both bars, passed both bars. But you could get admitted in Pennsylvania early. So it's like in January, February of 77, I think. But they made a decision. And I just said, hey guys, just make sure you don't have me sign anything because I really can't. It's coming. I passed the bar. But yeah, because of you opened up a door that I haven't quite shut yet. Or they haven't shut it on me, I should maybe better say.
Yeah.
Yeah, my God. You became corporation counsel.
Associate. Rick was corporate.
How did that happen? I mean, was it just you guys knew each other? And
I think so.
Yeah.
You know, Mark Hampton had been corporation counsel, and then he left. And Mary Horlacker was the secretary, legal secretary, in that office. And so Rick became corporation counsel, needed an associate. And what I liked about it, I was given the Jamestown General Hospital assignment.
Okay.
And Ron Frizzell was the administrator of the hospital back in those days. And I forget, I think it was Frank Bajano's mother, maybe was the head of the nursing. Mm-hmm. And great people, some interesting work, and I liked it a lot. It was fun.
Were you there at the time that Murray Marsh and Frizzell and the city decided that there would be a merger?
I think I was gone before that happened, if I remember. As I think then I was into public defender work part-time and some other things. I don't think I was at the hospital when that all came down.
As the associate corporate counsel, did you get involved in the litigation aspect of the city?
Well, I didn't do any negotiations.
Okay.
And I don't recall that many lawsuits actually back in those days, you know.
It's just a well-run city. That's.
Well.
Who was the mayor then?
Carlson, maybe.
Okay, Steve, yeah.
Could have been that far, if I recall properly.
Then you become the associate in the public defender's office. Who's the public defender then?
Whew.
Was it Eddie? Dick?
You know, I think I served under more than one, but I can't tell you exactly who they were. I don't remember that.
Yeah.
You know.
So you really had a smattering of real estate from Lucian and Joe, Wayne Tranmer, and hospital work, which is big major league corporation work through the city, and now you're in the criminal law world. You had a real mixed bag. Was there certain parts of the practice you felt more comfortable with than others?
No, I think the general practice was much more common and much more accepted, particularly in a more rural area like ours. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, you just, you did it.
And through the way, because you are a general practice and have quite a vast contact with the public, do you remember a character or two or an experience you'd say, Greg, there was this thing that I may not mention the name, but it was really interesting?
Well, there's a couple of things. At the time, there was a beautiful courtroom in the federal building. Up second floor. And the bankruptcy judge rode the circuit, which he still does, came there, Beryl McGuire, wonderful guy, and in those days, once a month, which really, for the kind of practice you have in Chautauqua County, was a wonderful thing because your cases were all on one day. You knew that was bankruptcy day. It was all there. And in those days, the trustees in a case were picked by the judge from the lawyers that were there for court. And I ended up being the trustee in bankruptcy for what became the Nickel Inn.
Okay, yeah.
That was a fun little thing, you know.
Yeah.
Go out in Ivy Road out there and see what's going on. And
Somebody had to do it, yeah.
ended up getting that sold, and
Yeah.
you file your paperwork, get paid a couple dollars. And the number of other areas of practice that the bankruptcy court has impacts on is really amazing. And there's a lot to learn from it, but it was good. Spoto would be, you'd have a case and Spoto would be the trustee. And all you had to have your I's dotted and T's crossed, because he's always looking for people that got treated better than somebody else during a certain period prior to the bankruptcy filing, And I had a case where a guy had a meat market, and he owed me money, so I just go down there and charge some food. So I ended up having to pay Spoto for it.
Really?
Because it was a preference.
Yeah.
Because I was getting paid and somebody else wasn't during that little period of time. Yeah.
90 days.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was fun. We always got a good laugh out of that. So.
Well, the bankruptcy. Who were some of the other bankruptcy attorneys? Not everybody did bankruptcy at the time.
No. I mean, Spoto was into it. Now and then I see Bruce Colton.
Was Tom Dory at the time? Was he into that?
Well, yeah, I don't remember when Tom started, but he did get into it once he was here, and then he became. They went from trustees out of the audience basically to standing trustees,
Mm-hmm.
and Tom had one of the appointments for a standing trustee down here, and then there was a guy from Buffalo that got cases also would come down for Chautauqua County.
Yeah.
But Spoto was big into it, and
Was Lanny doing that at the time?
well, Annie did, I believe, yes.
Yeah. So this kind of continue on your trip on biography. We had you with Lynn Hartley, then Lynn kind of became, well, not kind of, he did become the family court judge.
Yep.
And then did you by yourself, or did you?
No, I was by myself, and I hired Phil Calla at one point, and then we went through one of these economic downturns, and I had to tell Phil that there wasn't enough to keep us both afloat, so he moved on, did some other things, and he's done very well, obviously.
Yeah.
But he was a good lawyer. And then Kevin, who's Lynn's half brother, Walmer, had come down here, and so he and I ended up getting together. And then we went up to from the Wellman Building, went up to 4th Street.
Oh yeah.
And just by Selston's up in that area there. And then Chuck D'Angelo was practicing in Washington, D.C. His wife was teaching, and they had a desire to come back to town. So I talked to Chuck, and I know Chuck for some time, and actually represented him at one point for not a bad thing, a good thing, but I mean, just he'd been a client also, but Kevin didn't know him real well at the time, but we got to know each other, and so we were able to make arrangements. Chuck came back first. He ran a congressional campaign for Stan, I believe, one year, and then joined us, and it's been 30-some years, I think.
Yeah, Fessenden, Walmer, and D'Angelo. Now, Kevin had not known Chuck, and Chuck, who obviously we know very well, love very well, but he could be like a fire hose. How did you connect the two? Kevin is, just personality-wise, a little more reserved.
Well, I think we all had our days, and we compromised at times.
Yeah.
Sometimes, just like in a marriage, in my opinion or my experience, two people with the same personality don't always necessarily get along as well as two people who have somewhat separate or different personalities.
Yeah.
I mean, it can go either way, but, you know, so. So,
And you guys are a very large firm now, and for Jamestown purposes, probably the number of attorneys at some point, you're big as anybody. Not that that's a reason, but it's just your practice has been so drawn. Have you've kind of drawn specialties, if you will, silos perhaps is a better term. Was that a difficult thing to do, to kind of just say, all right, you know, we're going to have you do this and you do that?
well,
I mean, you had to give up something sometimes just to say, I'm not going to
Right.
do that, you're going to do it.
the hardest lesson to learn when you start practicing law is how much trouble and time and money it can save you to say no at the beginning of a case.
Yeah.
And the other thing is separating the business side of the practice and the collection of the money from the practice side. I mean, and that's where people that begin with a larger firm or have a really good mentor that can teach all those lessons can help you move it along quicker. But you know, you kind of follow the practice. I mean, more people are dying, you do more estates, and if rates are low for mortgages and there's more closings, you do more closings. I mean, but then you go into those times when mortgage rates were in the mid-teens, in the 80s, they were not happy times for if that's all you're doing. I mean, you had to have something else to be able to survive.
So you found itself, you know, quite a balance over there on Forest, and it's an impressive thing to watch. Do you guys meet weekly? Do you guys have I mean, is there a sort of a structure, governing structure there?
Well, the younger people are running it now.
Yeah.
I'm out.
Yeah.
So no, I don't meet weekly.
But did they at the time? I mean, did you guys kind of?
Well, yeah, we would meet periodically. I mean, it was, but it's our doors are pretty much always open, and we could, if you had something you needed to resolve, you grab people and just resolved it, you know, and moved on.
Yeah. It's very impressive. So you've dealt with some real personalities, and inevitably there's the point of these interviews where I roll this particular composite over, and whether you have a vignette or a story or a recollection as you look at some of these individuals, I'm going to do that, and you may not, but you might. This may trigger something.
But one of the benefits of doing the criminal practice for a while was sitting in the pretrial conferences
Oh yeah.
with Lee Town Adams and Bruce K. Carpenter, and I'm sorry, some of the other people, and hearing those stories and listening to Lee Town and Bruce K. Argue in Greek. Or, you know, you're doing a hearing and you take a break and then you're flipping quarters with the judge against the courthouse wall. Of course, you always had to lose. So that was a time-honored tradition. Seeing the people at the picnics.
Right.
I mean, Tony Span's picnic is up on Lake Erie.
Playing baseball.
And the Legion in Forestville for the Northern Bar, or at Shorewood when they were meeting there. I mean, the original picnics here at the Den Halesmans. One of the young guys did pretty much produce the picnic, and everybody else just came and enjoyed it. But it really was a good bonding time, and it seems like the pace of the practice and everything else was much more mellow then. I mean, you know, I went from 6-part carbons to this electronic age, you know, and I'm not sure it's all better, but.
Well, when you're talking about some of that, the guys have mentioned the picnic, and Tom Flowers specifically, I have a vision, and he talked about it, where he had been at the bar way too long and ended up being in the fire. I mean, he was, you know, while we were burning all of that stuff and cooking and stuff, And Tom, that's a vision everybody brings up, and he
Sure.
laughed at that.
Well, Judge Okada, I hadn't been practicing very long, and at the time they had part-time clerks. And Joe arranged for me to be Ricotta, one of Ricotta's part-time clerks for a while.
Okay.
So that was interesting.
Joe had been originally he was from Dunkirk, wasn't he?
Ricotta.
Ricotta, yeah.
Yeah, but Gerasi had made the connection and
Okay.
worked it out. Judge Alessi, I was trying a case in front of him, and on cross-examination, I was able to get the witness so upset that I got the judge to find the witness who was a complaining witness in contempt of court. That was kind of a highlight, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, practicing in front of Leetown Adams, I learned very quickly, the less you say, the better. I mean, he knew everything anyhow. So,
Did he ever help you along when he looked like maybe you were wallowing a little bit on the cross-examination or examination, sort of in his own way?
well, no, yeah, once you learn to read the smoke signals, I mean, I think he would try to move things the way he thought they should be going a little bit, yeah. Yep. Let me look at this. One of my first cases for Joe was an arbitration, and Arthur N. Bailey was on the other side of it.
Okay.
And I'm not sure, I don't have post-traumatic stress syndrome from that still about 40 years later. But it was a hell of an experience and a good learning thing.
Well, Art is pretty shy, you know.
Well, I always had to pay attention, because he would call you. You had something on Monday, he'd call you Sunday night.
Yeah.
And you had to be fully awake and listen to every comma, period, punctuation, bit of syntax. And if you did that, then you could understand what he was really getting at.
Yeah.
And but I've always gotten along with him well, and we've done some things together now and then. Art Catchpole, I used to see him at St. Luke's, and there'd be coffee down in the kitchen between the services, and we'd have some good conversations. Thad Clark.
By the way, was he the assistant city judge at the time you were practicing?
I believe he might have been, yes. Yeah. Of course, John Goodell had a long practice, and he'd come barreling into town court on his motorcycle. Thad Clark and Paul King both practiced with Joe for short periods of time.
Oh, did they?
I believe, yeah. If I remember correctly.
What kind of practice did Thad have? Was it a social services? Wasn't he in the county at some point?
I think he was, and he might have done some collection things or something like that. And Bill Duncanson Sr. had practiced there for a little bit with Joe, too. I think it was Gerasi and Duncanson at one point. My memory serves me. And he'd had an insurance practice, I think, also. I mean, seeing Howard Crosley, listening to him, going to his corner office, and when you've practiced a while and you look at this area and some of the lawyers we've had, I think, in my opinion, not including myself, I'm just saying as a general rule, the level of practice was actually quite good, and the quality of the lawyers was quite good. K.T. Johnson, when Cummins, Joe Gerasi had brought in a couple guys from out of town to help us get this economic development kicked off. And one of them was Richard Kosen. And I was working for Joe, and Richard bought this house, he in Maryland, on West Lake Street, which you're familiar with in Lakewood, which is the house I ended up living in later. But he was getting a VA mortgage, and at the time, they weren't always moving along as quickly as you might want. He was in a hurry, and he just said, I can deal with that part of it, you do the other part. So we got to like each other, and so got the thing closed, and pretty soon he says, hey, we got a friend, would you want to come over and have dinner and meet her? So I did, and she had been living in Washington, D.C., and moved back here. She was in Dunkirk. So we ended up going out and getting married after a couple of years, having a child. She already had 2 children, so that was the kids and the family. But that was an interesting little thing, that I met him buying that house, and then I met her in that house, and then we bought that house, and eventually sold it, but it was just, it was fun. But KT, I was talking about KT. So the thing about the economic development guys, this big plant up on the hill was empty. And they managed to pull it off and get Cummins to come in. And KT did the closing. And so you're up in this big conference room. I had one client with a little tiny piece, but they needed a piece, So I don't know if there were 20-some or 30-some lawyers there. And, I mean, a checklist closing, what they're going to do. I think that thing went on all day, maybe 2, just to get all the pieces checked off. But it was fun to go up there and just see all that going on. Turn your piece of paper in when you needed it. Yeah. Charlie Phillips used to call the bits and pieces, I think, if I recall properly.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And but he and KT kind of run that whole thing, and I mean, pretty amazing. I mean, Harrison was a hell of a guy, obviously. I think, back in the day, when you came to town like that, you kind of went around and made your manners with some of the offices just to get introduced, and there was a little more formality to that, I think, than there is now. That was very nice.
Just an aside, when I came back, Sherry had me become the guy for the United Way. All the attorneys all took their turn trying to solicit.
Right.
And he goes, Greg, normally if it was one of us older guys, we'd send a letter and nobody ever have any contact at all, and not get much of a response. So why don't you be my guy, walk around, you must shake hands with everybody in the bar.
Yep.
And I did. And guys, that may have been the only time, but the Russ Rogersons and the Sam Conneys and Marcus Conleys, at least you got to walk in the door and say hi. But you're right. You're right. You made your manners.
Yep. Tubi Scarpino. I mean, some of these guys, they were all one of a kind, and not all the same. But I mean, it was interesting. I mean, Warren Erickson, Al Ford, Wayne Herrick.
I was just looking at Phil Erickson. When you had a real estate deal with him, it was always a little intimidating, frankly, for me, because he was Phil. I mean, and he knew his stuff.
Yes.
And
he didn't like change.
No.
When the pace of change started to increase a little bit, he became very cranky. And I've learned to love the term cranky because I know it now well, myself. I'm less willing to put up with things that I really don't want to put up with anymore.
But I remember Phil specifically, whenever he'd be on the other side, he just kind of cringed a little bit. It all got through, but it...
Yeah, but he'd always find something that you either had missed or didn't know about in the first place, and then you went from there.
Yeah, it did. And I also assume you had Ernie Lee, working with Ernie, probably not on that sheet, but somehow whatever deal you had with him ended up being a constitutional law issue.
Mm-hmm. And doing matters with Sam Edson, what a gentleman he was.
Oh, yes.
Yep. And, yeah.
And his daughter just passed away.
Okay.
Nancy Whittemore.
Sure, she and Jim. Yeah, yeah, I knew them. You know, at one point, I was doing an adoption, and it ended up that the person had to go to an out-of-town hospital. Twins. So the birth occurs, and I've got to make the delivery of the two children, and it's wintertime. So I pull up in this hospital, and I go in, and I had a towel, which was thankful at the time for the weather. But so I got this address I got to drive to, and it's snowing, and I got these two newborns in the back seat, and I just kept hoping they'd make enough noise so that I knew they were still alive, you know. But I found the place in spite of the snow on the street signs, and delivered these kids and moved on. But you know, it's one of those things that you just don't think you're going to do as part of practice, but it ended up being doing, you know.
You know, it's funny. I did that twice, and because that was the procedure.
Yes.
That was the procedure. And Bob Sharp would be in the middle of something.
Okay, sure.
And I was the designated young guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that at all. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So Bob and Sherry, did your paths cross much with them?
Yeah. I mean, real estate and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And of course, Sherry then was a neighbor, and when we bought the place on Lake Street, he had us over and some neighbors, and you know, just very much the gentleman, and very nice. Yep.
So what do you have on your notes there that you're saying?
Well, I'm just trying to see if I had something here.
Because I was always asked the question at the very end, Dick, what did you expect I would ask that I haven't asked, and now you've made notes to that effect.
So I had one little case for a girl who had just turned 18, and she and her sister came to see me, and their mother had been killed some years ago, before that. And the money had been put in a trust account in a local bank, and the father was, but it was not to be dispersed without court order from the circuit court. And they went to look for the money, they didn't find it. So, but I was able to, you know, commit the case, and I was, it was either family or surrogate court that ended up hearing it, but able to get the money back for her. And I told her that this was the last thing her mother could do for her, and I was so happy that I was able to do that. And that was just a little odd case, kind of. It was a, you know, a nice thing to do. No, it's time goes like that.
Yeah. So if some young buck comes into Fessenden, Lomer, D'Angelo, and you're the, I hate to say it like I am, the gray hair guy sitting in the corner, and they ask you for advice, well, you know, they say, Mr. Fessenden, what advice would you give me here, as I'm a 28-year-old recent graduate from Syracuse University School of Law? What would you say to them?
Well, be ready to make a lot of changes from your expectations. And number two, I'd ask them if they ever run on a treadmill. Because once you get on the practice, you're on the treadmill starts. And I mean, yeah, some people can change or take sabbaticals or do something else and but if you stay here and you're in the practice from 1973 to now, I mean, the treadmill never stops running.
Right. Right.
So you just have to kind of figure out a way to deal with it. There's a lot of personal satisfaction in helping people, but trying to manage expectations and results is a bit of a game sometimes. Not a game, I mean, but you have to establish what the client is looking for at the beginning of the matter, and to ask yourself, is this achievable, or is it just is everybody's going to be mad at the end of the case no matter what you do?
Yeah.
And that's something that you don't know right away.
And that takes maturity, no question, to control expectations.